All right, we've talked about trade in prior units, but now we're going to talk about trade between countries. And the first word that you need to understand is specialization. Sometimes when we say that word, what we mean is we mean specialization of a business and its workers. So the idea being that they divide the labor up and you do the same thing the most efficiently. So, for example, if you go to a restaurant and order pizza, does the same person take your order, put the cheese and toppings and the sauce on the pizza, cook the pizza, take it out of the oven, give it back to you, and serve you? I mean, maybe if it's a really small restaurant, but if you're going to do a lot of volume and make a lot of money, it'd be better to have three people probably. One person taking orders and delivering. Maybe that's two people actually. One person making the pizza and one person cooking the pizza. And if you go to any busy pizza place, that's pretty much what you're going to see, right? That's specialization of tasks and specialization of workers. Okay. Well, in trade with countries, we use the same term. It basically means the same thing, but it's a little bit different on the definition. Specialization, when one country decides to focus its resources, so what we call the factors of production, right? It's land, it's capital, it's labor force, to produce certain types of goods and then to export the product that they're experts in. So they make it, they specialize in it, and then they send it to other countries and also keep some for their own country. When countries decide to send it to somebody else, we call that an export. Your country makes it and sends it to other countries through trade. When some other country is an expert in something and your country needs it, then you have to do the opposite, which is you don't have it, you need to import it from that country. So these words to me all go together. Your country decides to specialize in something, you then export it, and then you also import it. A good local example has to do with a lot of like agricultural products. In this area, we have great fertile, agricultural land, and there's more than one. But the one item I would focus on is, or maybe two, would be potatoes and cherries. These are two agricultural products that are exports of Washington State. We grow them here because we have the right soil climate conditions for them. We keep some for the United States and kind of sell them internally within our borders to grocery stores, but a big bulk of them goes to countries that can't grow them or don't have those resources. And so we're a major export area of both potatoes and cherries. On the flip side, if you want to go to a grocery store and get some type of tropical fruit like a pineapple, we can't possibly grow that here. And in most regions of the United States, they can't either. So unless we're really lucky and there's a couple growers in the United States that we can get from, because the United States is a big country, maybe we can get them internally, but often we have to go get those from other places. And so when you go to the grocery store to buy produce that's especially not in season, but even if it is in season and we can't grow in the United States, got to go get it from somewhere else, like a pineapple. So these are just simple examples of how this would work. I want to apply what we're talking about though now to a trade relationship, and I'm going to focus on two countries, the United States and Vietnam. Okay. So the first thing you'll notice, if green represents Vietnam and blue represents the United States, because it's a bigger country, it's a bigger economy, it has more factories and resources, land area, the factors of production just greater. In theory, it can produce more of whatever it sets its mind to be the expert in. So, for example, the United States can produce 25 planes. That's what they can produce, and no clothing. Or they could produce 44 units of clothing and no planes, right? Those and anywhere in between at the production possibilities curve are their options of choices. Vietnam, because of its limitations, can't do as much, can't do the volume, but it can max out at 5 planes and it can max out at 30 pieces of clothing. So it's not nothing, but there's a gap there. Because the United States can produce more of everything if it wants to, we say the United States in this trade relationship has the absolute advantage. It can just do more. And it's sometimes, if you look at the graph, would be you would ask yourself, well, why would the United States ever bother to trade with Vietnam? It makes zero sense. They can produce more. They can produce more clothes, they can produce more planes, and they can have a combination of both, and you don't need Vietnam. It's clear that Vietnam would benefit from trade, sure. But the United States, that makes no sense. Well, it does, and that's what we're going to look at on the chart over here. So if you boil this down, what does it cost the United States to make a plane? It can make 25 total, sure. But if you get it down to one, you figure out that the opportunity cost, remember that from the first unit, is one plane basically costs the United States the opportunity to make 4 items of clothing, right? So this is what we call the opportunity cost. The reverse of this is one item of clothing means that the United States gives up the ability to make 25% or 1/4 of a plane. These are the opportunity costs to do whatever it is that they choose. Okay, it's pretty high. In Vietnam's case, though, they can make 5 total, yes, for planes. But if they want to just make one plane, their opportunity cost is actually a lot higher. They have to give up 10 items of clothing to be able to make one plane. Notice that's a lot higher opportunity costs, the next best option, right, than the United States is. But interestingly, down here, if they want to make one item of clothing, it only costs them 10% of a plane or 1/10. So their opportunity cost for this is actually lower than it is for the United States in a weird kind of twist of fate thing. So the way we think about this when it comes to trade is we use another word and we call this comparative advantage. And basically, what this says is you trade or trade makes sense in areas where your opportunity cost is higher. Now, there's a bunch of different definitions of comparative advantage that you're going to look up, and it gets pretty formal. But it makes sense for your country to be thinking about trading with other countries when you have an opportunity cost that's higher than them. So, for example, if the United States gives up only 4 items of clothing and Vietnam gets 10 items of clothing, then in a trade relationship, it makes sense that the United States should specialize in making planes. It's just as simple as it doesn't cost them as much. So the United States should be specializing in making planes. And we can look this up, but if you look up worldwide plane producers, guess who's number one? The United States. So this is actually a real life scenario that makes a lot of sense. Okay. When it comes to Vietnam, they should specialize in making clothing because their opportunity cost, once again, it's just math, is lower than the United States. So in a relationship between the two countries, if Vietnam was able to give the United States clothing, the United States was able to give Vietnam planes, right? Then both countries would benefit. Because if they try to both do both, it's going to be not as efficient as it otherwise could be. So then the question is, well, what kind of a trade agreement would they enter into? And if you split the difference between, 4 and 10, and you get 7, I think that makes a lot of sense. So if the United States, for every plane, Vietnam was willing to exchange 7 items of clothing, this would be a good deal for everybody involved. I'll tell you why. The United States would be getting one plane. It would normally cost them 4 items of clothing. Now they've reduced that and they get 7. They get 3 additional items of clothing for making that one plane. So that's a benefit of plus 3 items of clothing for every plane that they make because they're going to sell it to Vietnam. Good deal. Vietnam, what do they get? Well, it was going to cost them 10 items of clothing, right? It was going to cost them 10 items of clothing to get that one plane back. It's only going to cost them, 7 now. So they save themselves plus 3 items of clothing. So if you're thinking about businesses and trying to make profit and trade with each other, you get the most bang for your buck if you trade with the opponents or the other country's weaknesses, right? The United States needs clothes. Vietnam needs planes. It benefits both the trade. And the reason that trade happens is because of comparative advantage. Countries look around and say, hey, we've got a really high opportunity cost. It makes sense to trade with them. It's going to be good for both of us. And that's how they're going to do it. So we're going to go into this in more detail, but this is just kind of a crash course into what this is all about.